again, we have at the two extremes, we have both the A1A and also the A2A being identified in the United Kingdom. So the lineage B can be divided into functionally distinct clades, some of which exhibit compatibility with receptors on human cells and some which are unknown. These clades are capable of recombining to impact human host cell entry phenotypes. Beyond the RDB receptor interaction, host proteases processing is another species barrier encountered by the lineage B beta coronaviruses during cell entry. Looking at the global picture of where we are today, we can see, just observing from the color scheme, that there's a predominance of the A clade of the beta coronaviruses here. And we see, although A is predominantly found, that there's some heterogeneity here. We also have imputation and also continued proliferation of some of the B clades, not just only in China here, but we detect some of them have been detected in North America. So enough genetic variation between different strains of viruses that is there to place them in clusters or clades. Within the clades, there continues to be genetic variation, resulting in further subdivision of those clades. Research on the implications of such diversity is ongoing, and several studies have been published, and continued research and outputs are needed for better interpretation of transmission and clinical implications. Sequencing data being presented may have implications for vaccine development and treatment. What other factors have been proposed to be associated with the geographic spread? We look at things like weather. The Global Virus Network, which constitutes 52 research centers worldwide, has been supporting such initiatives on weather modeling. And this will help to explain the spread of the virus and possibly to predict the regions most likely to be at higher risk of significant community spread of COVID. The color gradient indicates temperatures in degrees Celsius. And if we look here, the risk of significant community spread here is demonstrated in the light green bands outlined by the darker bands. And as the weather changes, as we go through the different seasons, let us see what will happen as we transition from the winter to spring and to the summer months. And this will also help to determine how the virus will behave on an ongoing basis. So in summary, there are several factors that influence the geographic spread and human-to-human transmission of the virus. There are host factors, including underlying disease, immunity, and things such as the D3 deficiency, which is also associated with the sun's rays and the weathers in different zones, climate zones. Virus factors, the virulence, the pathogenesis, asymptomatic infections, environmental factors, including transport, locally, internationally, and climate, social factors, economic factors. Importantly, the capacity of the medical system to detect, respond, and contain the virus, and the understanding of the community and healthcare workers of the virus and risk factors that are associated. In interpreting models for projections, the interplay of all these factors need to be considered. Countries such as Jamaica, in preparing for the detection of further imported and community spread should use all available resources and information and mitigating strategies to contain the continued spread of COVID-19 and minimize morbidity and mortality associated. Thank you very much.
I want to thank Dr. Sandra Jackson for her presentation. You can hear, if you listen, ladies and gentlemen, at the content here, you hear the detail. This is a really small microscopic particle, as I call it, the virus. But Dr. Jackson has provided such detailed information on its behavior. And it's, she talks about mutation and those kind of things. Certainly giving us very, very important insights into how the virus is behaving and how things have moved from Wuhan to Kingston, Jamaica. I think this information is important as we battle it on all fronts, as we take the fight out there to the COVID-19 pandemic. So once again, thank you, Dr. Sandra Jackson, for taking the time to put this excellent presentation together and to present to us on the behavior of this virus here. Thank you very much. While COVID-19 is a disease that affects really everyone, we heard from our former speakers that we're all at risk. It has a worse effect on our older population, members of the aging population. And certainly also we have seen persons with pre-existing conditions. That term, there are a lot of phrases and terms where we are learning as this COVID-19 goes forward. We hear about pre-existing conditions. And so today, ladies and gentlemen, this morning, I'm very happy to introduce one of my distinguished colleagues, Professor Denise Eldermeyer-Scherer, who is going to bring insights to us on this issue of the impact of COVID-19 on the older population, on seniors, and that's almost all of us now. I think I will qualify in that group. So I'm very eager to hear what she has to say. And also on the issue of pre-existing conditions. Professor Eldermeyer-Scherer is well known in the region at the University of the West Indies. She is Professor of Public Health, Aging and Public Health. She's also the director of the Mona Aging and Wellness Center and a former head of the Department of Community Health and Psychiatry. And she wears many hats. It will take the whole morning for me to give all of the full introduction for this distinguished lady. But certainly, ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to welcome to the podium our Professor Denise Eldermeyer-Scherer to speak on protecting the vulnerable seniors and the pre-existing conditions. Professor Scherer.
Thank you very much, Dr. Paul. Let me add my word of congratulations to you, to Prof. Christie, for pulling this together, and of course for including the older persons in it. You mentioned the issue around seniors. Now, seniors are only 12%, 13% of the population across the Caribbean. However, we are taking our messages from what we have seen happen in particularly China and Italy, where the information is available from. And if the current slide speaks to that, and it tells its own story, in that you look at the death rate in the 80-year-old versus the 50 to 59, and you see the dramatic increase in that older age group, 80 and over. There has been emphasis more recently on the 70 and over, and with just cause, because as you can see, that's 8% in that age group, 70 to 79, that was kind of getting buried. Hence, whereas we started off talking about over 80, and you will notice that the initial regulations here or directions actually said 75, and in the government's last go round of regulations, it changed to 70, and there is scientific evidence for that. We do speak about, they speak about pre-existing conditions, we speak about comorbidities. Again, we had started off talking about diabetes and hypertension, which are still very critical, both of them, as you can see from this slide, being 9.2 and 8.4. But you will remember that there was a case here in Jamaica that they wondered if it was COVID or heart disease. And we are now finding, and this is WHO CDC information, cardiovascular disease is in fact the comorbidity most associated with death rates at 13.2% and is significantly higher than the other three individually. And therefore the issue around MIs, etc., is very important. Raises an important point that I want to make on this slide. We have to be very careful about the focus on COVID-19 when it comes to older people, because with the high rate of comorbidities, we are still seeing the heart attacks, we are still seeing the illnesses that we see in the older person, and we have to be sure that they don't get buried under the COVID-19 initiatives. So COVID-19 is killing 13.4% of patients over 80, compared to only 1.25% in their 50s and 0.3% in the 40s. Therefore, this speaks to the importance of trying to protect. And we now know something we didn't know 4 weeks ago, and as everybody says, this is very evolving. As we get more and more cases, unfortunately, we get more and more information. The sharp divide is at age 70. It's 4% of people in the 60s, doubling for the 70s. So we begin to see that it's 70 and over where we need to focus. And I found the next one, got it yesterday, interesting. In Italy, of the persons dying, 83% of them were over 60. So there's no doubt about it. So why are older people so vulnerable? Aging in itself causes an increased risk, and I'll show you why, than the earlier years. And they're not able to fight the virus as well because the older immune systems are weaker, the wear and tear of time. What is happening is that each time your body has to fight something, it takes its toll on the immune system, coupled with the aging changes of less cells, etc. And therefore, by the time you get to 70 and 80, the system is simply not as responsive as it was before. It also, aging itself, slows down the body's responses to the reaction time actually decreases. That's wrong. So, sorry, increases is correct. So you take that much longer. Just think of somebody that you are speaking to and the pause before they answer you. That takes place throughout the body. So when you speak to the immune system and you say, I'm on board, I'm a virus, it takes a while for the immune system to respond. And thirdly, the low-grade inflammation that many older people have constantly due to arthritis, and we have 42% with that report arthritis, that dulls the ability to respond. It's a bit like, you're constantly, the analogy that was given is, something's buzzing in the air. Eventually you stop hearing it. Somebody coming into the room hears it. Well, your system is no different. So how do older persons and the wider society, including family and friends, and here we say governments as well, protect older persons? There's really only one option: don't get it. That's the best option for older people. Part of the challenge is, how do we get older people to understand you simply cannot get this thing or you're going to pay the price? So we need to protect older people. How do we protect older people? We start with all of the guidelines on sanitizing and washing hands, and as has been distributed. Sometimes challenging, especially in communities where there is no water. And I will mention the social distancing and what happens in high density communities. So you follow all of those guidelines, regardless of whether you're staying at home or not, regardless whether you're avoiding all contact, you still have to do the sanitizing. You still have to cough into the tissue and throw away the tissue. Now, we know a lot of older people use a rag and use a towel. That does not work during COVID, because you're going to reuse that rag and you are going to reinfect. So it's about tissues, paper towel. I know it's a cost factor, but it's a cost factor that might save your life. So older people do this by staying home and avoiding close contact. I don't like the term social distancing because social distancing in older people leads to social isolation. And therefore, we prefer physical distancing for older people to get across the point that, yes, you need some social interaction. And unfortunately, this does include family and friends. So the grandchild climbing all over you has to be from a distance. The grandchild can come into the room, but you and your children are going to have to learn to communicate from at least 6 foot apart. It's not ageism, it's not discrimination. I keep hearing that it's a penalty. Some say that this is just too much. But honestly, it's probably one of the first times that so many people have wanted to protect our older people so well. And we really need to take it as a blessing and say that we are at least being recognized as an important group. So it's not, it's care, it's love. So social isolation is a real concern for older people. Older people are already combating loneliness. One little interaction is to go to church. One only has to look at a churchyard after the service is finished and people are hanging around for an hour or two talking. Going to the supermarket, as one lady told us on the radio the other day, and she was, 85? Nobody can pick my meat for me. Nobody knows whether the pink is the right pink or not. We suggested to that lady that she have her son who is doing her shopping, send her the picture. She does have a smartphone. So we suggested he could send her 4 or 5 pictures. She could tell him which one. To which she said, but I haven't touched it. So it's really about behavior change. And it's really about adjusting your life, bearing in mind you want life. So you don't want to put yourself in harm's way. Also, interaction with people for older people is all about self-worth. It's about feeling wanted. It's about feeling needed, that caring for the grandchildren. So many of our older people are really missing the school pickup because that's when they interacted. That's when they felt important, when somebody would say, please pick up Johnny at school. And therefore, as we look to the social isolation, we need to find ways that older people can still consider themselves important and worthwhile. It means no hugging. No hugging does not mean no contact. And I think that's an important message. Communication and staying in touch is therefore key. And how do you do this? And here families have a key role because we've gotten used to saying, well, okay, 80% of our older people are fine. They're physically and mentally well. And that comes from the 2012 study of older people. We actually only have 8% dependent. So most older people have gotten used to making life for themselves. And we're now taking that away from them. So we need to make the suggestions as to what else. Church is a big thing. So find church on radio and TV. They may not, and this is family again, have a critical role. So family is going to have to step into this gap. Family, of course, here does not mean biological only. Many of our older person has the person next door, the neighbor next door, who is the real family, the 24-hour family. So family here is your community family, your church family. Someone can come, yes, they can come, because if they sanitize and they put on their gloves, they can find out where on which channel, because most of us with 700 channels haven't a clue where to go. So one of the gifts that you can give an older person is to go and find their church service for them and show them which channel and how to get there. Market. Where on radio? We have so many radio stations now. The younger people can find out which church service is going on, who is doing what. Is it Reverend Blair? Is it somebody else? Who is the sermon for Sunday? And I warn you, older people do not think it's church without singing. And they say they have to hear this song. So you have to get a real church service. One of the keys to successful aging is having a routine. Now, most older persons' routine has been dislocated by this social isolation. They are used to going to the supermarket on a Thursday. They're used to going to church on a Sunday. They're used to going to the pharmacy. By the way, pharmacy and doctor is an outing. It's not just, we're saying get a relative to pick up. We are removing an hour of social interaction. So they need to have a routine. So it's for a family member to sit and figure out what is the routine for the next 4 to 6 weeks, and a routine which has some interaction. Maybe it's doing homework via the telephone with a grandchild, and have a plan for this routine, but also, most importantly, a plan if you get sick. What is the plan? Everybody is being told stay at home, but an older person needs to discuss with somebody. We had a case yesterday where an older person, diabetic, hypertensive, couldn't get up. So we were talking about it. It turns out this morning the person does have to go to hospital. The glucose monitor was not working. So whereas the wife thought it was 48, it was 480. So that you have to be available. Healthcare has to be available, and a temperature of 102 in the axilla, and they don't have COVID. They haven't been out of the room. So the thing is that you have to have a plan. Who will you call? Don't think I'm old, there's no room for me here. Tell somebody if you don't feel well. Equally, reach out to family and friends to discuss your fears. Information is power. A lot of people are hearing about COVID. A lot are watching the television programs, and they're not sure about it. Discuss it. Share ideas. There is an important group of people. There are about 40 to 50,000 of them, and a group that have real issues when it comes to COVID. They have difficulty understanding all this information and facts. What they know is that their life has turned upside down. They used to walk outside, suddenly you're telling them to stay at home. One patient that I have has very agitated because her daughter is at home. If her daughter at home means her daughter lost her job. Her daughter at home does not mean that she's asthmatic and has to be at home. She's lost her job. And she, the mother, is now a burden because with no money, how is she going to look after her? She does not understand COVID. So they're going to have difficulty. They may even have difficulty remembering and understanding the safeguarding procedures. One lady wanted to know why she must wash her hands. Are you trying to tell me I'm dirty? You don't tell me to wash my hands before. And why do you have on a mask? Are you scorning me? That's the world of somebody with dementia. So let us remember these people. They're certainly going to ignore the warnings. They're not going to self-quarantine and they're not going to isolate. And families are going to get very frustrated because you're telling this person to stay inside and they're going outside. And then there are the caregiver issues. There are many caregivers today who cannot come out of St. Catherine. There are many caregivers that are coming out of areas and the family wants to know how to test them because they're coming out. I was talking to one who's coming from Spanish Town. So we have said do temperatures because they can't get tested. The mother in this case has a peg tube. So she is at risk. Can the caregiver come? Persons in the rural areas have a benefit here because rural areas, even with crowded houses, the caregiver can usually stay in. And then there's the possible clinical issues. Is it confusion of dementia or is it confusion of fever? Remember, older people don't get fevers, they get confused. Close family members know the different types of confusion. Trust me on that one. They know, they have been through this for years. Many of them know the difference between the confusion of the dementia and the confusion because the sugar is too high. They know the confusion of a fever, of an infection. Listen to family members. Do not get caught up in the pressure of COVID and lose an older person because of not listening and not checking them. The delirium of hypoxia can present very similar to dementia. Which is it? Is there COVID or is there not? We are saying stay at home. We are saying stay away from people. But we also now know that a large number of persons who are asymptomatic can spread the disease. So therefore, we need to protect our older people, even those that are at home. And memory issues, so they can't give you a history. They don't know where they went. And this is all came out in Lancet this month. So that is how some thoughts on protecting our older people so they can live to see tomorrow. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Professor Eldamar-Shera, for, wow, I was just, I don't know if it's breathless, but I was taken up by your presentation as you sort of unravel the social fabric of COVID-19 in the context of the aging population. I think, ladies and gentlemen, it was a kind of reality check for us, some really, really pertinent issues that face us every day. I think I want to ask Prof a question, and we've seen in the news in some settings that, and based on your report there, the nursing homes in all parts of the world, not only the Caribbean, we have a large number of nursing home settings set up in different levels and different set of technology. And so, but it's a place where we find a lot of our seniors living and, having a community life. What can we do to reduce risk in nursing homes? And how do we, some people say, should I put my mommy in a nursing home at this time? Is she safer there? So could you say something about that, Professor Shera?
Thank you very much, Dean Paul. I knew there was a second group that I was to put up there with the dementia, the nursing homes. Very important and very concerning. And there are two issues to the nursing home issue. We're also saying family shouldn't visit. So an older person, even not necessarily with dementia, but doesn't know why you're not coming. You will have seen that some of the nursing homes in America have allowed you to look through the window and to have conversations. But most of the nursing homes that I have been to here, both public and private, are kind of closed in. There's no sort of outside window. But thinking on my feet, one of the things that could be done for some of them is many of them do have verandas. So for well older people, you could bring them to the veranda and socially distance. So you could, exactly. You have to be very, very stringent with the staff. Temperatures need to be done going in every morning and at shift changes. They have to wear masks. And they have to use gloves. So it means that we have to think about PPE for local government staff, for the public infirmaries, and everybody knows that they're a special interest area, as well as the nursing homes. So, and these fall not only under the Ministry of Health, because homes for the elderly are not nursing homes and are governed by the local government regulations, because they're not sick. The washing of hands is critical. Not every nursing home has a basin in every room. And therefore, the issue of making sure that every bed has a bottle of sanitizer beside it. And of course, training of the staff. And I think we just have to, there's also a problem with the homes, both public and private now, with all of the various lockdowns, nutrition is critical. One of the most important things about the immune system is that you want to support it. Nutrition supports it, exercise supports it. But on lockdown, you can't do exercise. They're not getting a lot of fruits and vegetables at the moment because they can't come in from the various places. So you want to look at that. But I think the most important thing is the staff. And the sanitizing is important, but also doing the temperature is important. And reassuring them. No, I would not put anybody new in a nursing home at this point of time, not only because of COVID, but moving to a nursing home is a traumatic activity for an older person. So you don't want to have two traumas at the same time. So hold on and wait.
Thanks very much, Professor Eldamar-Shera. I think as we thank Prof, one of the things that the hosting of this conference now from the Faculty of Medical Sciences, our UWI campus in Jamaica, is, in addition to sharing information, to bring a sense of hope and to put some positive support and guidance for our population. And I think this presentation has brought what I would call a kind of collective empathy for the care of our seniors at this time. And certainly we see, I take from Prof's presentation, we all have a role to play: family, caregivers, government, public-private sector, as we move forward. So once again, thanks very much, Professor Mashera. Excellent presentation. And we'll move on to our next speaker on our COVID-19 pandemic conference. We're very happy that you can join us this morning on our COVID-19 pandemic approaching Code Red conference. Again, I want to welcome all of our audience out there, those of you who have joined us on the link. And as we continue on the conference this morning, we are looking at a broad picture. Our University of the West Indies, our Vice Chancellor, Professor Sir Hilary Beckles, takes a very broad look at where we are with respect to the situation. We have a UWI COVID task force set up and chaired by one of our pro-vice chancellors, Professor Landis. And I'm very happy now to welcome another one of our pro-vice chancellors, Ambassador Dr. Richard Bernal. Dr. Bernal is a professor of practice, pro-vice chancellor for global affairs right here at the University of the West Indies. And he's written quite a lot in the areas of globalization, trade, economic development. And in fact, he's heard on radio on Power 106 in Jamaica on Mondays at 11:30 a.m. speaking on the global economy. And so he's very well placed for him to speak on the topic post-COVID-19 pandemic economic outlook, an important aspect of our response to the pandemic. We have spoken a lot this morning about the health and the epidemiology, clinical testing, but the story is not over until we look at the impact of COVID-19 on the economy and on the wider community. So ladies and gentlemen, just join me in welcoming Ambassador Dr. Richard Bernal, Professor of Practice, who will address the topic, what happens after COVID-19, the pandemic economic outlook. Professor Bernal.
Thank you, Professor and Dean of the Faculty of Medicine. Very pleased to join you for this discussion of the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. The pandemic, as you have mentioned, has already been discussed in terms of its health implications. And today what I want to do is to share some thoughts with you on the wider economic implications. The pandemic has already put national and global economies into a recession. Nobody's sure how long the recession will last and how intensive it will be. We've already seen a contraction of economic activity of significant levels. And if this persists, it will certainly be a recession of a magnitude worse than that which followed the 2008 financial crisis, and far worse than that which followed the September 11th terrorist attacks. Indeed, the more dystopian forecasts are talking about levels of unemployment which rival that of the Great Depression of the 1920s and 30s. What is sure is that the world economy and our economic and social life is never going to be exactly as it was prior to the pandemic. The pandemic has implications not only in the immediate future and the present, but some of the changes which will be initiated as a result of the impact of the pandemic are likely to be changes which will become medium and long-term structural and institutional changes as the effects of the pandemic works through the economy and as the recovery takes place. Because the Caribbean economies are small developing economies, they are highly vulnerable to external events. And in looking at the economic impact on the Caribbean region, I therefore want to divide my remarks into two sections. First of all, I want to look at the global economy and then turn to the implications and the indigenous aspects of the economic impact in our national economies. At the global level, a number of forecasts have been undertaken, and I will share with you what those are. The International Monetary Fund and the World Bank usually have meetings in April and October. In the April meetings, they prepare a global economic outlook. Their forecast is that there has already been a significant loss in the first quarter of 2020, which will continue and perhaps intensify in the second quarter. They are basing their forecast on the assumption that in the third quarter and the final quarter of 2020, there will be some resurgence and recovery of economic activity. Indeed, in the first two quarters, the losses have been very significant, measured by, say, unemployment. That the overall rate of contraction will be somewhere between 3 and 5%, based on the assumption that losses in the first half, some recovery in the second half, and coming out at 3 to 5%. This, of course, is based on certain assumptions which may not materialize. Things may actually be worse, depending on the duration of the pandemic, how long it takes to bring the pandemic under control, and how much has to be spent to resuscitate employment and economic activity. Turning to the Caribbean economies themselves, the Inter-American Development Bank, World Bank, and IMF have all made some estimates of the likely impact of the COVID-19 virus pandemic on Caribbean economies. And I share these with you. First of all, it is forecast for Suriname, a contraction of 1%, in Jamaica, 2.9%, Dominica, 3%, St. Vincent, 4%, St. Lucia, 7.2%, and Barbados, 7.7% contraction. These are measured in terms of contraction of GDP, which, as you know, is a measure of overall economic activity. The estimates, unfortunately, have not been provided for Trinidad and Tobago and some of the other Caribbean countries, but I share with you what has been published in April this month by those institutions. I give you an overall view of the likely impact. Now, turning away from the macroeconomic impact to the sectoral aspects and to individual aspects of the impact. First of all, there is already and will continue to be a major impact in terms of fiscal budgets. The Caribbean economies were already experiencing difficult fiscal situations, and some countries were working out of very difficult debt situations, where the debt to GDP ratio in some countries is well over 70%, sometimes over 100%. There will be a major reallocation of expenditure to come as money is invested in public health, in controlling the pandemic, and in restoring the health of the population. In addition to that, the regular budget expenditure is not likely to take care of the issue of the expenditure for public health, and therefore there'll be need for additional revenue. Obviously, at this time, additional revenue cannot be extracted through tax because economic activity is down and a number of persons and businesses are suffering severe difficulty. So it is likely that there will have to be borrowing. The borrowing situation is going to be somewhat difficult. It's going to be somewhat difficult because the Caribbean economies are regarded as middle-income developing economies, and therefore they are already graduated, a polite term for excluded from the most concessionary financial facilities. However, there are some immediate disbursing facilities from the IMF. The IDB and World Bank have reallocated within their portfolios a significant amount of money to assist countries to make these transitions. And we will have to access those. Those countries where the local financial markets are such that they can borrow locally will also have to resort to this. But it will also mean that within this reallocation of resources to take care of the public health expenditures, that some cuts will have to be made in some other planned expenditures. Secondly, in terms of employment and unemployment, we are already seeing a number of persons who have been displaced, in particular in the tourism industry, which is likely to take some time to recover, and in entertainment and services in general, but increasingly across all economic activity, because all these sectors are linked, and the decline in employment and income in one sector serves to contract demand across the entire economy. There is going to be some increase in unemployment. One of the factors that has to be noted is that much of the employment in the Caribbean is in the informal sector, and these people therefore depend on expenditure from households and businesses in the formal sector. Thirdly, I think it is reasonable to expect that across the globe, those who are already disadvantaged and poor are going to feel the effects disproportionately, and in the short run, there will be an increase in poverty and inequality. Fourthly, the debt situation, which I referred to earlier, is going to be exacerbated in that there'll have to be a substantial increase in debt. Debt has to be paid for, and even if there's debt forgiveness, debt restructuring, refinancing, there is still going to be a lot of increase in debt, given that the Caribbean countries were already among the most heavily indebted countries in the world. A fifth impact is going to be some adjustment in the role of the state. The kind of resuscitation of the economy which will be necessary is going to draw the state into an expanded role. In addition, whenever there is a crisis, scarcity of supplies such as certain medical supplies, you are going to have the intervention of the state to bring more regulation to the operation of the market. The market left by itself may allocate those scarce resources only to those who are already relatively well off. A sixth thing is that globally, there's going to be a pushback against globalization and a repatriation of a lot of manufacturing and agricultural production, which previously was imported. Countries are now going to realize that the cheapness or the availability of imports is not the only consideration, and that domestic production also is important for the security and the resilience of their economies. So some of that premature deindustrialization which has been taking place in the Caribbean is going to be halted as we reshore, bring back on shore some economic activities which were relinquished, and this is good. Seventh, there are going to be opportunities in any crisis. The famous dictum is, a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. Put more simply, there are opportunities even in the midst of a crisis, and we must look for those. We have already seen a number of innovative developments, entrepreneurial activities at the household level, at the level of firms who have redeployed or redacted their production facilities to produce different goods, etc. So all is not doom and gloom. The Caribbean people have a long record of resilience to all kinds of man-made and natural disasters, and there's no reason why we should not find creative ways to expand. Finally, let me say that we are going to have to reactivate some sectors, and the extent to which we can reactivate those sectors depends not only on the measures we take internally, but it depends on how the global economy evolves and how quickly it recovers. In particular, I'm thinking that many of the economies are service-driven, tourism in particular, financial services, entertainment, BPO, business processing, outsourcing. These are good jobs and they have served the economies in the region well. They will have to be resuscitated. This is going to require government to support the private sector in rebuilding, because there are expenses which the private sector must meet and households must meet, rent, etc., while the contraction of the economy is going on. The government will have to assist in terms of loans. The local financial sector will have to find ways to refinance and to alleviate some of the interest payment burdens which will be faced. And this is going to take a lot of collaboration across the society. It's going to have to involve a tripartite effort: governments, private sector, trade unions, civil society, to come up with programs which can resuscitate the economy. I remain convinced that the Caribbean people can deal successfully with this terrible pandemic. It is going to be difficult, but I see no reason why we should not be able to rebuild our economies. I end on the cautionary note that while we rebuild our economies, we must realize that life is never going to be exactly as it was before, and certainly the global economy will experience some changes, and we have to adjust to those in a proactive, strategic way so that we can resuscitate the economic development of the region. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ambassador Bernal.
I think I went 16 minutes.
Thank you very much. You did very well. And we are very, I think that was an excellent and very clear outlook in terms of giving us that view, something that I think our audience would very much appreciate. Within your presentation, there's a lot of reality checks as to where things are, and those impact points that you raised in potential for increase in poverty, inequality being exacerbated, increase in debt, and coming with that, looking at the role of the state and so on. Ambassador, I have two quick questions for you. One is, some people paint, and maybe in an effort to keep hope alive, that tourism is not dead and that tourism can certainly bounce back very quickly. But in the context that what the impact on tourism is driven by a medical condition that carries stigma, and the issue of tourists wanting to come back quickly and easily to countries, to our region, where, like many other parts of the world, COVID has come through. Is the outlook for tourism really optimistic, or is it, if we're doing a reality check, it's going to be a long, long time before we get back to where we were with tourism? What are your thoughts on that?
Let me put the recovery of tourism in context. First of all, international travel is going to be different than it was in the past. There will be a lot less business travel as more meetings will be done by Zoom. There will also be more health precautions. That is, I think airlines are going to be required to ensure that the passengers they take on board are cleared medically. If not, they will be responsible in the same way that if they bring into a country somebody who does not have a passport, they're responsible to take them out. That is going to happen. Secondly, the irony is that the developing countries of the Caribbean have done relatively well compared to some of the source countries for our main tourists, such as in the US and in the UK and Italy and Spain, so that people in those countries should feel relatively safe coming back to the Caribbean. Thirdly, based on experience after the global financial crisis and the 9/11 events, the Caribbean is close to the US. The pattern of US tourists is to take short visits. The Caribbean is affordable. It is doing well in terms of handling the pandemic. And I think that based on that, we could be favorably disposed for a relatively quick resumption of trips to the region. Now, I think that where tourism will be relatively soft for some time will be in cruise shipping. Cruise shipping had experienced various health crises even before the pandemic, and the pandemic has certainly trapped a number of people on board ships for extended periods.
Yes.
And I think it will take some time to rebuild the comfort level for people to start doing cruise shipping.
Yeah.
However, the tourist industry has proven to be very agile and creative, and I'm sure that special packages in terms of price, etc., will be offered across the region in hotels and in the cruise shipping area. So all in all, I think that the tourist industry may be able to recover relatively quickly.
Yes, thank you. So that's very sound analysis. Professor Christie earlier in the conference had spoken about immunity certificates, the potential for things like that in the future. And as you mentioned, travel, airlines asking for perhaps some evidence that you're safe to travel. We can see things like that coming forward. My last question, perhaps just to get a comment from you. Prior to COVID-19, we recognized the presence of China in the Caribbean. And I know, Ambassador, you've written quite a bit on this. We have within the university Confucius Center activities in terms of China being a partner within both the economy and the academy. Post-COVID, and given China's involvement with the pandemic, it started in Wuhan, we know, and now we see that they're catching their breath and picking up, while the US is having quite a lot of challenges. Is there any kind of differential positioning that we would see with China post-COVID prior to where they were pre-COVID in the Caribbean region?
China has been an important source of development financing for the construction of infrastructure, buildings, etc. And as you know, the Chinese have launched a major initiative, the Belt and Road Initiative. Given the amount of financing that the Caribbean is going to need in the period of recovery, and given the fact that as middle-income countries, they are not eligible for certain dispensations. For example, the IMF debt relief for the 25 poorest countries includes Haiti, but it doesn't include any other Caribbean country. So I believe even with the additional resources which will be mobilized by the World Bank, IDB, Caribbean Development Bank, and IMF, that there will be the possibility of the Caribbean getting some development financing from China. This may very well be to improve the physical infrastructure in the public health sector, and also because these loans are usually available not at lower interest rates, but with less intrusive conditionality than some of the loan facilities available from the traditional multilateral development financing institutions.
Yes, thank you, sir. So I think, Ambassador Bernal, I want to thank you for putting the perspective forward. You said a good crisis should not be wasted. Charles Dickens speaks of the worst of times and the best of times. And I think you have our efforts in this pandemic conference here is to bring some hope. Certainly, your talk has you've been realistic, but within it, I hear there's opportunity and there's hope for the region as we go post-COVID pandemic. Thank you very much, Ambassador, for your presentation. And we're very glad that you can join us. Yeah, thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, as we come to the end of this morning's conference, we want to look in a very heartfelt way at where we are. We have looked at where we are epidemiologically, in terms of testing, clinical science, treatment, therapy. But we want to get really at what I call the heart and soul of the COVID-19 response. The people or population, how do we feel? We talk about things like social distancing and the impact that is having on us. So as we move into Code Red, and as we approach Code Red, we want to look at hope in uncertain times and talk about where we are and what about us. And there's no better person that I know to present this topic. He was a speaker in our first COVID-19 pandemic preparedness conference. And I must say we had a lot of positive feedback on his talk. No other than Professor Wendell Abel. Professor Abel is currently the head of the Department of Community Health and Psychiatry here at the University of the West Indies in Jamaica. He's also a member of the UWI Regional Task Force on COVID-19. And he's professor of mental health. And he's well known in Jamaica and in the region for his work, his public service, and his work in promoting positive mental health. And that's why we have him here this morning, ladies and gentlemen. Let's welcome Professor Wendell Abel to really close us off on this at this conference here this morning. Welcome, Prof.
Hello, everybody. Today, I'm going to be talking to the topic, hope in uncertain times. It was almost a month ago that we hosted the UWI conference on COVID pandemic. And it's almost 4 weeks later. And I want to pose a question to us. How has your life changed? And wherever you are today, I want you to just quickly write it down. Without thinking, just make a list of the changes that have occurred in your life. You can keep doing it, yes. You have a few seconds left. Okay. And I can only imagine some of the experiences we're sharing and some of the things that either come to your mind or you would have written down would include lockdown. For some persons, unfortunately, job loss, layoff, school closure, children at home, the financial problems, talk of economic recession. Sadly, for some persons, it's about illness and death. Hopefully for most of us, it's about social distancing and just being able to practice it. And for all of us, certainly our social lives have become limited. And the way we work and even the way we worship would have changed. These are indeed uncertain and frightening times. Uncertain and frightening times. But I want us to be positive and to remain positive and to remind ourselves that although many persons will get COVID-19, it will be in a mild form, hopefully. And I'm sure this would have been shared with us by previous speakers. We also know that social distancing reduces the number of persons getting it at once. And the good news is the majority of persons who get the disease will survive. And I've shared this before, but I just want to share it again, that the death rate, and it's over range now and it changes, but approximately 99% of persons who get COVID-19 survive. And therein lies the hope, right? Only 1% die. And we hope we're not among the 1%. What about us? And so we encourage us to be positive, stop the catastrophic thinking. And you know, I've been shared it with us before, and to remind ourselves that we're not in this alone. We're all in this together. And you know something? We will all get through this together. And I think that therein lies the consolation and therein lies the hope. But despite my trying to generate hope and being positive, for many persons actually go through an emotional roller coaster, what I refer to as a COVID emotional roller coaster. And for those of us who've been on a roller coaster, we know what the feelings are like, right? And so I want us to name your feelings. I have projected here a list of feelings. And as I go along, check them if you're experiencing these feelings. Many persons, it's fear. Other persons, anxiety. Other persons, disbelief. In fact, sometimes I wake up and I ask myself, was I dreaming? Is this a dream? Is this for real? And I have to come back to the real world and say, yes, this is a pandemic. It's happening in my lifetime. Unbelievable. For some persons, depression. If you're feeling depressed, check that. And for other persons, frustration. As we cope with the lockdown, the fact that we have to be remaining home, we can't socialize as we used to. And a big one for many persons, grief. Because, you know, grieving is a natural response to loss, be it loss of your job, for persons who've lost family members, loss of a family member, loss of the things that we have been accustomed to doing, yes? Just our daily routine and interacting with people. And so I want us to name our feelings. And if you have any other feelings, just write them down. Because it's important that we deal with these feelings. We have to name them, claim it, and tame it. And I want us to repeat it wherever you are, right? You may be in a room by yourself, and if somebody hears you saying that, they may think you're going mentally ill, right? But just smile about it. So everybody repeat it. We're going to name it, claim it, and tame it. I want to remind us in these times to be compassionate with yourself, right? Remind ourselves that our feelings are normal and natural. And when we have these emotions and we go through this emotional roller coaster, it's not a sign of weakness. We have these feelings because we're human, right? In much the same way, cars run on fuel, human beings run on feelings. So we must name it, claim it, and tame it. I want to encourage us to live now in the present. Let's not think about next week, next year. Focus on the here and now. And you know something? Let us be grateful that we're at a place, we're alive. We can be listening to this discussion. Yes? Let us focus on the here and now. And we have to learn to accept those things over which we have no control and focus on the things that we can control. And to remind ourselves that tough times don't last, but tough people do. Let's repeat that. Affirm it in your consciousness. Tough times don't last. Tough people do. I just want to turn to our healthcare providers. And I'm numbered among healthcare providers. We're on the front line, some of us more so than the others. And I want to commend my colleagues who are on the front line. They're exposed to the COVID virus on a daily basis. They leave their homes in the morning, I'm sure, thinking about the possibility of illness or even death. They're working long hours. Many of them suffer from burnout or maybe close to that point. They're away from their family. It must be very difficult for them. And I want us to pause wherever we are at this point in time and applaud them for the fantastic job that they're doing, right? Our healthcare workers, right? And it's important that we also help to protect them by staying home. And so, to our healthcare providers and all of us, I just remind us to ensure self-care, take care of self, ensure we're having adequate rest, we engage in physical activity as best as possible, pay attention to our diet, and manage stress, whatever way you learn to do it, whether through physical activity, through your spirituality, prayer, relaxation techniques, manage stress, especially during these difficult and uncertain times. It's important that we filter the news. News today can be very confusing, sometimes scary, hopeless. I'm sure you find that that's your experience. Certainly it's mine. And what we have to do in these uncertain times, confusing times, is that we have to set limit on television watching, being on the internet or social media time. It's very important. And sometimes it's important for us to decrease a conversation. Somebody calls you. Next time you get the call and somebody wants to talk to you about COVID, tell them you want to take a break from that. You want to think about something positive. Yes? We have to shift the conversation sometimes. And remember, your actions count. Everybody, we must take responsibility for our actions. And I'm not going to go through these. We know the things that we need to do. And I know many of us have been doing a great job here in terms of our hygiene, respiratory etiquette, avoiding close contact, staying home if sick, cleaning objects and surfaces. Very good. And I want us to pat ourselves on our shoulder for the fantastic job that we're doing. Everybody, it's a butterfly hug. Excellent, right? And let us remember our actions count. Let's continue to do that. I want us to remember that it's important in these times of physical distancing to remain connected. And we can do that through whatever way works for us. Telephone, text, social media, chat rooms, Zoom, WhatsApp, etc. Right? But let's remember to stay connected. And as we try to stay connected, I want us to pause wherever we are and to sing with me. I can't sing, but I will read the words. We're going to have a sing-along. Reach out and touch somebody's heart, not hands. Make this world a better place. So everybody, reach out and touch somebody's, make this world. If you, excellent, right? Now we're going to sing this along throughout the COVID season, right? Reaching out and just touching somebody's heart and making this world a better place. It will be a better place. We have to remember to cultivate an attitude of gratitude. I want us today to, in a very solemn way, just count your blessings. The fact that you are here, you're celebrating life, we're alive, right? And to remember that gratitude will help us through these times. And as I come to an end, you know, the mobile phone, telephone is a wonderful device. And for it to function, we have to keep it charged so that we can be connected. And I just want to encourage us, just stay charged and be connected. And I want to say to everybody, thank you. Take responsibility for your lives. Therein lies the hope.
Thank you very much, Professor Abel. Very encouraging words from our professor of mental health, and certainly an encouragement for us. Professor Abel, I have a question from a member of our audience who says that I had COVID-19. I was discharged from hospital. I was tested negative and I'm now fully recovered. But a lot of my family and friends are not as close to me as they used to. I'm now a bit depressed, even though I've recovered from COVID-19. Don't know if you can speak to that person for us.
Thank you for that question. I'm glad and I'm celebrating with you that you're much better today. Yes, and therein lies the hope. Unfortunately, a lot of persons who have tested positive have become ill, or persons who have been in contact with persons who've tested positive experience some amount of stigma and discrimination, right? And this is born out of fear on the part of other persons, and probably, I mean, just a need for them to protect themselves. And I think we have to recognize that other people, it's not that they want to reject us, it's not that they don't care for us, but they just want to protect themselves. And it's understandable that you would feel depressed. And I probably should have touched on that earlier, that for all of us, but more so persons who have been affected, we're at great risk of longer term psychiatric problems such as depression, chronic anxiety problems. Other persons may develop post-traumatic stress disorder. It's a possibility, especially for our healthcare workers who are on the front line, working day in, day out. Other persons may even develop conditions such as obsessive compulsive disorder. Know that we have to be washing our hands and going through this routine continuously. For some persons, it may become an obsession, right? And they have difficulty coping with it, yes? So a whole host of psychiatric mental health problems may develop. And you're highlighting the fact that you are getting depressed. Just to remind you that depression is a common disorder, and what you need to do is to reach out to mental health provider, yes, to your mental health provider, so that we can do a proper evaluation and to determine what sort of support you need, whether it's going to be talk therapy or you need to be on medication or whatever, right? But just encourage you to keep faith, keep hope alive. Do the things that work for you, whether it's prayer, relaxation technique, whatever, right? But just to recognize that it's not, depression is a possibility here. And so I'm really thankful that you've shared this with us, and really happy to have clarified some issue.
Thanks very much, Prof. We are really prompted and pushed by your talk to leave with hope as we approach Code Red, and depending on where your situation is, all of the issues you raised with the fair and so on, that even as we physical distance, you said, I think Prof. Shera said it, that for the elderly, she doesn't like the word social distancing. As we distance ourselves physically and protect ourselves from the virus, we are going to be encouraged, Prof. I'd leave with this to say, reach out and touch somebody's heart and make this world a better place. It's okay to touch the heart at this time. So thank you very much, Professor Wendell Abel. A very able presentation, if I may say so, this morning at our COVID-19 pandemic conference. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we've had a wonderful morning going into the afternoon for our COVID-19 pandemic conference. We chose the title, Approaching Code Red, signifying that we are about to approach, if some people would argue that we're there, but certainly a heightened stage of engagement with respect to the pandemic. The last time we met, we spoke about preparedness, and I must say that preparedness is always on the table because we prepare early, but we must continue to prepare right through this phase of the pandemic. Today we had a range of speakers. We had excellent speakers, and I think you'll agree with me that what they brought to the table was that sense of heightened awareness and deeper engagement with respect to the management of the pandemic. If you have felt anxious, if you have felt scared, afraid, if you have felt depressed, then I hope that today what the University of the West Indies here in Jamaica has brought to you is, one, credible information, and around that a sense of hope and a sense of we can, yes we can. And certainly when we hear of the efforts being put forward, when we hear of the intellectual thought, when we hear of the thought leadership, and the kind of expertise that we have, it certainly brings to my mind a sense that we can have success over the containment, mitigation, and control of the COVID-19 pandemic, not only in Jamaica, but in our Caribbean region. Our university, and again, I mentioned our Vice Chancellor, Sir Hilary Beckles, is a regional man. In fact, he's a global man. And what the university does at times like these, in these crises, is important in terms of the impact that it has globally. We have come together as a region. We have come together as academics. We have come together as with partnership with ministry, with government, with the public health system to make an impact on COVID-19. And I'm happy today that we're leaving this conference with that sense of solidarity. We heard about it. We heard that from previous speakers. Professor Figueroa, even the sense that we're engaging in the solidarity trial, WHO trial, says that we are in this together. We heard the words of Professor Abel saying that hope is alive and hope is there, and we are in this together. So as we close, I want to encourage everyone to look after yourselves, look after your families, look after your community. Let us continue to love and protect ourselves as we love and protect each other. And as Prof. Abel encouraged us to do, reach out and touch, not somebody's hands, social distancing is still there, but reach out and touch somebody's heart. So maybe what we're saying, physical distancing is there, but social connection, reach out and touch somebody's heart. Let's help somebody today as we go forward. As I close, I want to say thanks to all of our speakers, all of our distinguished panelists who came, presented, took the time. It's a busy time for many of our speakers, but they took the time to present. On your behalf, I want to thank them and to really wish them well and show appreciation for their support. I want to say a special word of thanks to Professor Celia Christie, who is a visionary, really. She spoke, you heard her speak earlier on the natural history of COVID-19, but she's really the force and the vision behind a lot of what we're doing at this time in terms of getting this scientific information out, pushing the university to be forward-thinking and to provide information to the public. So a special thanks to Prof. Christie for her leadership and for her vision. I want to thank the Mona Information Technology Service team, in particular the UWI Mona Media team. That's a special group that we have, and I must big them up. They have taken the time out of a situation where some of them should really be, looking after themselves now and doing stuff, but they've come and helped us to get this show on the road. And I also want to thank, in addition, my faculty of medical sciences team, in particular, Mr. Damian Brown, Ms. Sharon Roberts, for their support. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to lastly thank you for tuning in. Thank you for clicking on the link and participating. Thank you for your questions. We'll try as we go forward to look at all your questions. I know we'll have a wide range of comments and questions. And as a university, we promise to respond to this. But take care of yourselves. Let's go forward in solidarity as we fight this COVID-19 pandemic. God bless.